Okay, and we're live.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the finale for the Ad1 Challenge A1C41, the last ever Ad1 Challenge finale. We from now on will be doing the Fluent in 3 Month Challenge finales, and Benny and I can talk a little bit about that in a moment. But for now, as a part of this finale, we're going to answer a few of the questions that our challengers have submitted to us prior to the finale, and we're also going to give our finalists here with us today the opportunity to ask Benny, Lindsay, and I some questions as well. But before we get started, I want to take a moment to give our panelists and finalists an opportunity to introduce themselves. So today, our polyglot panel includes Lindsay Williams. Lindsay, why don't you go ahead and do a quick introduction?
Sure. Hello. So thank you, Shannon. My name's Lindsay, Lindsay Williams from Lindsay Does Languages, and I've learned quite a few languages to varying levels. Don't ask me to speak them all, depends what day of the week. Currently working on figuring out a way to fit things all together in a nice pattern for 2020.
And we have Benny Lewis. Benny?
Hey everybody, we decided before this call that my new name is officially Benny Technical Problems Lewis because I always seem to have these technical problems when I'm starting a live stream. And I, of course, the beautiful face behind Fluent in 3 months, and I think that's essentially the only talent I bring to things. That and the language learning, obviously. And I have been into this for a very long time. I'm really excited to be pushing the Ad1 challenge into the Fluent in 3 months challenge. And this is the very last time, the last iteration of the Ad1 challenge before we switch things over to the new one. So yeah, I'm very excited to see what questions people have and to talk about the progress that everybody's been making so far.
All right, and I'm Shannon Kennedy, the head coach for the Ad1 Challenge and now Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. So our finalists from A1C41 are Heijin, Turia, and Deborah. And our finalists for Ad1 Advance are Nick, Alex, and Carrie. So we have 3 of our finalists with us today. So I'm going to give you each an opportunity to introduce yourself, state your name, what language you learned, and what the biggest thing you got out of the challenge was. I'm going to go in the order that I see you. So I see you first, Alex. Why don't you go ahead and take a moment to introduce yourself?
Okay, so my name's Alex, and in this challenge I've been learning German, which I've been doing for a while already. And the biggest thing I got out of the challenge, so these were actually quite a few things, but I think the most important one is definitely that the fact that I've been proven once again that having a community hold you accountable to something is it does magic. It's really powerful yet simple mechanism, and yeah, I really like it. I'm happy to be part of it.
Thank you. Turia?
Hi, I'm Taria. I learned Spanish in this last challenge, and the biggest thing that I gained from this challenge is the friendships that I've made. When I first started my language learning journey, I was very alone, and everyone around me was really bored of hearing of my latest failures or efforts. And so when I joined the challenge, not only did I find a tribe of people who are learning languages, but I also gained a lot of friends through the mini challenges, like trying to speak with new people. And this last challenge, I was in Spain for most of it. And I was able to connect with all of the friends that I made through the challenge while I was over there and see them in person. And now that I'm back in the States, um, I, it doesn't even feel like language learning now. It feels like connecting with a friend.
That's awesome. All right, Deborah?
Hi, I'm Deborah. I'm still learning German, and the part of the challenge that I liked most was the second mini challenge. I think the one where we had to write sentences, practicing one grammar rule. Because in that challenge, I felt that I was doing something together with other people. So it wasn't just chatting or exchanging opinions. It was doing something together, and that was the part that I liked most.
Great. Thank you. So thank you all of you for being here with us, and thank you to our panelists, Lindsay and Benny. So let's go ahead and start. Let's jump into the questions. Deborah, Turia, and Alex, I'll give you a moment to think of some questions for our panelists. And while you do that, we're going to go to some of the questions that Hey Jean, one of our finalists who couldn't be here today, submitted. So her first question were, what were the obstacles that you faced when going from intermediate to advanced level, and how did you overcome them?
Would you like to take this one first, Lindsay?
Yeah, sure. So this is a very good question, a very common question that comes up a lot. I think really from going, I love the way that Steve Kaufman described this once at Langfest in Montreal, where he says it's like an inverted hockey stick, which is probably the most Canadian description of the language learning. But it really is true how at the beginning you make all this progress and it feels really good. And then it's just this long, slow drag. And you really don't see that progress anymore. So it can be really demotivating, as it feels like this just goes on forever and ever. But for me, one of the key things in that stage is really connecting to the things that you enjoy in that language and with that language that you can. And I noticed actually it was Hajan that asked this question, right? So I made a note when I was watching all the videos. I loved how she'd actually really incorporated French into her life, like she was doing French yoga and stuff like this. This is the perfect way. She's doing all the right things at that level to then begin to sort of move on and keep going and keep improving. So yeah, that is my kind of short answer to that, is to incorporate it into everything that you do as much as possible. So it just becomes normal and just normal life.
Yeah. And I would add to that especially in Hygiene's case, because she was, she's at this stage of being able to already communicate and she wants to move on to the more advanced situation. I've personally found the European Common Framework exams great in the higher levels as something to aim for. So in the case of French, she looked into the DALF, either the C1 or the C2, to kind of start looking into not necessarily having to sit one of the exams, but maybe planning to do a mock version of one of those exams with a teacher. For me personally, I found that like I can get to the intermediate stage with pure practice and a little bit of deliberate study, but I kind of reach a plateau that no amount of practice is going to get me past that plateau, and that's where I need a lot more structure. The structure that we tend to see in a lot of language courses that I think are misplaced too much at the beginning, but you definitely need a lot more of that structure at the end. And having these C-level exams to aim for have pushed me to see what are the mastery level things I'm weakest at. And teachers have helped me to improve my reading skills, my writing skills, my ability to have conversations about complex topics instead of just the regular how are you doing kind of topics, and more along the lines of the engineering I might have studied in university. And I was guided to improve those things by looking into the exams, and there's various books on how to pass the exams and the example exercises. So especially with European languages, you can do that. Of course, there are equivalents in other countries, like if you're doing Mandarin, you can do the HSK and so on. But that is one of my personal recommendations.
The only thing that I'd like to add to kind of tack on to what Benny said about complex topics is when I start to move into the advanced level with a language is when I'll start to specialize more. So it's when I'll really begin to focus in on very specific topics and get really good at those specific topics, not in a shallow way where I can just kind of talk about it, but actually learning some of the more technical or advanced vocabulary associated with this topic so that I can really dive in deep with it. And because at that stage, that's when those sorts of things are really going to matter. So, Turia, you have a question?
Yes. My question is, how do you handle language setbacks or humiliations? I had a lot of those in Spain where I'd make a huge mistake and it was hard not to, I don't know what the word is, just get overwhelmed by the thought of, why am I even trying this? This is so hard. And obviously, you do work through it, but I wondered, you all have learned many languages at this point and have had many setbacks and disappointments. And what are some tools that you use to handle those?
I might jump in first for this one. I would tell you firstly to kind of in a way embrace the idea of these setbacks as being more central to the project itself. And as you know, I always tell people I have my goal of making 200 mistakes a day. I would even expand on that, and you might add something like your goal is to have at least 3 humiliating conversations a week. You know, as ridiculous as that sounds, it absolutely has to be a core part of your project. Because if you have the kind of goal that implies you will never have an embarrassing conversation, then that is something you will definitely fail with. And it's something I would definitely fail with. It's just not possible. There's always going to be some form of setback. So the first shift is the mentality shift to try to change the concept that it's such a bad thing that you run into these challenges. So these brick walls are a part of the system. And then the other thing I would say, it's not necessarily a tool, but to switch things around and see what can you take out of that situation that's a success. Because obviously, if you feel like the conversation came to a standstill and you feel embarrassed to maybe not try to speak to those people again later, that's a terrible thing. But you can still look at it and try to put some kind of a positive spin on the situation. Like, this has shown you that you're truly lacking in architecture vocabulary or whatever it might be. And then that is a win in its own way. That's telling you what you can do to improve on it next time. Or maybe you'll feel really bad about the conversation, but it'll also be the first time you've ever talked to 2 people simultaneously who are also talking to you. So, like, even that you will feel like it's a loss, because that first time that it happens will be overwhelming, and you will feel, oh my god, I'm such an idiot. I thought I could talk because I was talking fine with one person, but 2 people is just so overwhelming. But on the flip side, you have begun that process of talking to 2 people. And that is important. Even if it feels like a failure, it's very important to reframe these things as a success, because the mental side is such a big aspect to it. And I've definitely overthought the negatives myself, and that's gotten me down, and I felt like, why even bother? I just see nothing but all the mistakes and the failures and the lack of progress, and then I don't do anything for a week or 2, and I'm essentially creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, because by not making progress, obviously I've even more to be disappointed about. So there's no like hack around it. It's just a case that you have to keep your motivation up to be able to make progress. And with that in mind, it's very important to see that you are actually still achieving something, even in those situations that don't necessarily go so well. Would you add anything to that, Lindsay?
Yeah, 100% agree with that. It's all about if you reframe everything, so actually you're aiming for these embarrassing kind of things that are traditionally seen as negative, right? Like the mistakes and the failures and the embarrassment, all of that. If you're actually aiming for that and setting that as part of your goal, then it's completely changed your whole mindset about it, and it then doesn't appear to be a setback because it's been what you were going for, right? So yeah, 100% agree. The thing that I would add to that is also the idea of, I've forgotten what I was going to say. There was something I was going to add and I've forgotten. Shannon, do you have something? Maybe it will come back to me.
No, I just like the reframing it as, like, with the mistakes and these sorts of things being what you're aiming towards as opposed to what you're aiming to get away from, because having that mindset is definitely going to help you feel a lot more confident about any of the mistakes that you make. And then also just accepting that they're going to happen. They happen even in our native language, and we tend to let them go and not even notice them when they happen. I probably make tons of speech mistakes in English every single day, and I just keep moving forward through the conversation to get my point across. And I go, oh, maybe that was kind of silly, or, you know, that one really kind of made me stumble, but it's not something that I ever judge myself. There we go. Judge myself harshly for. So I think we have like this different set of expectations in our other language that, you know, make us feel this way about it. Like I think because we already have our native language and we're at this level and we are able to communicate in this way, we kind of get impatient with ourselves for not being able to do that right away in our new languages, forgetting the things that we went through. I mean, if you have kids, you're constantly correcting them. Their grammar, they make grammar mistakes, they make pronunciation mistakes. There's all of these different things as they're developing the ability to communicate in that first language that we need to kind of allow ourselves to make in our new languages. Lindsay, do you remember what it was that you wanted to?
I remembered and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. So it's something you've actually been doing as part of the AD1 challenge, and that is documenting your progress. So when you do feel, inevitably, even if you reframe everything, there's still going to be moments when you feel like, oh, is this even worth it? But if you've been doing something along the way, like whether that's, you know, writing a journal in the language, or whether that's just keeping track of your habit with it, or as you've been doing, I think the best way with the AD1 challenge is recording yourself speaking. You can go back. Have you gone back and watched your day zero video, Taria? Because you totally should, and you'll see like, whoa, wait a minute, hang on, I went from that to that. And that can be a real boost when you do feel that setback feeling and that kind of creeps in. So that was it, document and then check back in.
That's actually a really good thing that I want to bring up. So thank you for that nice segue, Lindsay. One of the new things that we added to the Fluent in 3 Months challenge is a journal. So you actually have a journal now that goes through all 90 days. There's a daily and a weekly section, and then tons of other activities and little motivational things included inside of it. So if anyone watching or any of you here, if you do a future challenge, you'll get that journal, and it'll allow you to do exactly that, document your progress in another way other than the videos. And that's kind of the purpose of the videos as well. Deborah, you had a question?
Accents. So I'm one of those people that will never lose the native accent, whatever language I'm speaking. So I would like to know what is the reason why? Because someone says that it's just something that you do with your mind. So your mind is stopping you, is blocking you somehow for some perverse reason. And someone else instead says that is because you have been using your vocal cords in a manner for your entire life, using your own language. And when you try to pronounce different sounds, your cords cannot manage to adapt. So I don't know which is, is one of these reasons true, or is it just excuses?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in here again to address that one, because I had several projects that I've really focused on the accent aspect of things, and I think when we tackle language learning, because it's much more about the differences between our native language and the target language, we tend to put a lot of our time into learning these maybe phrases, maybe vocabulary, maybe grammar, and practicing them, of course, if you're getting spoken sessions with people. But that is different to the accent issue, because there's sometimes pronunciation guides, like how to say this letter in particular, but there doesn't tend to be, in most language learning processes, a guide in how to change your accent. So what I found in my own personal experience, it's not necessarily because my vocal cords have grown a certain way and they're just going to be frozen there forever. Because I could only speak English until I was in my 20s. But I've learned how to make new sounds that I could not do before. And the way I've learned them has kind of depended on the sound, of course. But in general, when it comes to accents, I like to give this very unlikely tip to people, that maybe instead of talking with a language teacher, maybe you might want to consider finding a music teacher, because I've personally found so much benefit having someone with experience of teaching people how to sing to help me with my accent issues. So for instance, when I was trying to reduce my accent in Brazilian Portuguese, the singing teacher that I got, who was a native Brazilian, told me that when we speak English, we tend to separate the words. It's a kind of Germanic language thing. But when you're speaking Portuguese from Brazil, you gotta put the words together, go up and down, and talk through your nose. And she got me to do this, and some of it involved, it felt like I was mocking the language at first, but like, you know, with a native's permission, I was going along with trying to say these phrases the way she would say them, and she corrected me. She was like, no, robot, you said that way, that word in it like a robot, say it again. And I don't know if she had any language teaching experience, but the fact that she understood the vocal cords really made it a big difference. So either someone who can help you with some kind of a singing or music background, or a speech therapist, because these are things that you can learn. They're not the things that people with language experience tend to be able to teach us. So it's a kind of almost, it's like a different field of study in a way. But I absolutely don't think it's something that you can't learn. You do have decades of getting used to saying things a particular way, pronouncing letters a particular way, but you can absolutely unlearn that for your next language. It's just a case of how you practice that, and I think it has to be dealt with a different way.
Yeah, I think that imitating, like you say, it does feel a bit like, am I mocking? Is this okay? Yeah, it's fine. You know, if you're learning, you're going through it. But also, just a quick note to add to that, Deborah, is I have been speaking Spanish for decades, almost, at least one, and I still can't roll my R's. Like, I'm the worst R roller in the world. But you know what? I kind of just go with it and do my best. And having an accent is actually quite endearing. So, you know, don't shake your head. I know you probably feel like you want to improve it and you want to be perfect, but until that point, it like work with where you're at, okay? And people will understand you. It's fine, okay? So please, like, I don't want you to stress over it. That's my point, okay?
I also think your accent's a little bit a part of your identity, and a lot of the thing that we have with a new language is finding reasons to talk to people in the language, and so having that accent provokes curiosity in them, and so they'll want to find out more about you, like where you're from and what your background is. So it creates this interest in the other person that gives them a reason to talk to you. So I don't think they're necessarily a bad thing. I do understand wanting to maybe lessen it so that you feel like you're being understood a bit better, but I don't think that accents are a negative thing. Alex, you had a question. Oh, Lindsay, did you want to say something else first?
Just one more thing.
Okay.
If your accent is perfect in another language, it gives you less margin for error with everything else. People think, wow, what a perfect accent. You speak this language so well. And then you make a mistake in the grammar, and all of a sudden it sounds really weird then, because you've got this perfect accent, but, okay, right? So yeah, just another final.
Yeah, and I'd like to add the same kind of thing, that even though I've had projects that have worked entirely on the accent, I think that people put the accent on too high a pedestal. I mean, unless you truly are aiming to be James Bond and to like infiltrate a country and I don't know, be a spy or something, there's no really good reason to have completely eliminated your accent. And like Lindsay says, sometimes you can get away with more things. And even in a country that I'm a native speaker in, even in America, when I make the mistakes that, like Shannon said, we all make mistakes. Sometimes I'll kind of be a little cheeky, and I'll say, oh, that's how we say it in Ireland, even though it's absolutely not the case. And sometimes you can get away with the fact that you don't have to know every single expression and every single archaic word or something, because people are aware that you have that accent. And it is, the charming aspect does help. It does help for making friends and having something interesting to talk about. Whereas it can actually be a little intimidating to people if they come to you and you have no accent at all. Because people I've met who at polyglot events, I personally felt, oh my God, this person is like a billion times smarter than me. I'm not worthy to be in their vicinity, you know? And that's also going to be a problem in terms of intimidating people. So an accent isn't the worst thing in the world, but like I said, there are ways to at least reduce it.
All right, Alex, your question.
All right, hopefully I won't make it too convoluted. Okay, so another thing I got from the challenge is that it made me admit that I've clung to my comfort zone too much and I haven't been doing what I should be doing. So one thing I realized is that I haven't been putting enough time into my learning, and I see two ways out of that. One of them is what Lindsay already mentioned, which is to integrate German into my life more. I mean, I live in Germany, I should be able to do that. And another point is that I would actually like to embark on a more intense challenge for a while. And by intense in this case, I mean about 20 hours a week. I think this is as much as I can invest at this point in time. And I'm basically asking for a single piece of advice for doing such an intense challenge. So if you were to give me a single piece of advice, what would that be?
I'm trying to see if I could kind of compress what you're saying into something I can directly respond to. Do you have immediate thoughts, Lindsay?
When you say 20 hours a week, how long are you thinking? Because the first thing,
months.
okay, because the first thing that comes to mind is, like you said, that's like a lot of time, and if you start that and go indefinitely, that feels like it's going to fizzle in a lot of cases. So just by setting yourself the shortest deadline possible and say, okay, I'm going to do this for 1 month, I'm going to give 20 hours a week, and making sure you're keeping track of those hours, and seeing when, and knowing that if actually you do miss an hour here or there, it's okay, because it's almost like a kind of project in itself, the kind of documenting, like, how many hours am I giving, okay, when can I give more, when am I not doing enough, when am I, when have I got any free time, and all of that. And then saying, okay, 1 month, how did I do? Was it easy? Was it difficult? And then kind of reassessing and just going at regular intervals like that, rather than just feeling like, so 3 months is a good amount of time, as long as Add1 challenge, right? Fluently 3 months challenge, right? Where you're checking in every month just to make sure, am I going in the right direction? Do I need to reassess anything? So that would be my one thing, is that if you go for like a short chunk of time and then you're checking in at shorter chunks of time just to realign things.
Yeah, and I'd add to that by saying that effectively one of the great things about checking in once every month or so is that whenever somebody asks me what the best way to learn a language is, obviously it's impossible for me to give a good answer because it depends on so many things. But even if I know everything about one person and all of their priorities, I still can't necessarily give a good long-term strategy that's going to work for them, because any truly good language learning approach is going to be dynamic. So what I tell you that works for you right now for the next month may be very different to what the best thing you should be doing 1 month from now would be. So this is why checking in and seeing like, where do you stand in all of these things, and constantly looking for your weaknesses, which is we tend to look at these weaknesses as problems and feel bad about them. But if you turn things around and be actively trying to find what is slowing you down, what's preventing conversations from moving forward, and working on those as the priority, then it changes your perspective on them and you start to welcome these learning opportunities. So I think especially in the long term, it can feel demotivating because there's effectively an endless list of things that you have to perfect in a language. But if you look at that as more opportunities to continue to improve, and use those in your month-long milestones, as this month I'm going to focus on this aspect, then you can be pushing different aspects up one at a time. And I personally feel a better sense of achievement from that compared to taking a course that might teach me a little bit of vocabulary, a little bit of this. Like, generally, I would do one of those courses in half the time that I'm putting into a project, and the other half of the time, if possible, I try to see what are my biggest weaknesses, and I'll veer away from the course and focus on those biggest weaknesses.
The one thing that I'd like to kind of bring up and have Lindsay and Benny touch on this as well is, with a project like this that's that intensive, where you're looking at doing 20 hours of language study a week, is the risk of burnout. because burnout could not only lead to you not completing that project, but also just completely burning out on the language in general. And so managing it in a way that you're aware of this and being proactive and preventing it is really important. And I know, Benny, you've done some of your 3-month missions, you've been studying like 8 hours a day. So if either of you have any tips for Alex as far as preventing burnout while she does this.
Yeah, do you want to go first, Lindsay?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important that you acknowledge at the beginning, okay, what am I counting as study time, right? And maybe that means that you have like kind of I'd say two, keep it simple, different kind of levels of what counts. So you've got the real kind of like active, sitting down, doing stuff, like Benny, you said the word dynamic. I think that's a really good word for it. That more kind of in-depth stuff. And then you have the stuff like, okay, I'm cooking and I'm watching something on Netflix in German, or I'm going to like read a German book on my commute, that kind of more passive stuff. And you can decide, okay, I want like an 80% active, 20% passive, or am I not going to count that stuff at all? Or, and you decide what counts as what, and then that way you're not just relying on, okay, go. Well, that's too much, so just deciding what counts for you and addressing that at the very beginning would be something I'd touch on that in terms of not burning out.
Yep, and I absolutely agree with that. I'd add to it, I think when it comes to burning out for me, when I'm doing a language learning project intensively, it tends to take over my life. It tends to be the one big thing in my world. And the issue with that is there's a lot of other things that I think we just need for our own mental health tend to go to the wayside. So sometimes, even if I'm doing an 8-hour intensive focused work session or study session, it might be a good idea if I schedule into that day that I'm going to take 1 hour and just go for a walk through a park or something like that. And I also tend to sacrifice my health in other ways, like I'm studying so hard that I'm like, oh, I've worked hard, I deserve a pizza. And that, of course, is going to contribute to your lack of energy, because all of these things, you start to feel I've worked hard, so I deserve to binge some Netflix show. And these tend to be the things that sap your energy rather than recharge it, that you just, you lose momentum. So there are ways that you can, like Lindsay said, you can be dynamic in terms of what you're putting your time into, but even like stepping outside of the whole language learning sphere and thinking, how do you spend the rest of your time, and trying to reward yourself in ways that are not necessarily bad for you. Because I think I am definitely guilty myself of rewarding myself for these intensive binges by doing something that I want to do, but I really should not do. And because of that, I suffer the consequences. I'm binging a show until 2 or 3 a.m. after an intensive study day, and then I don't have enough sleep and I'm tired the next day. So I think this, how you spend your entire time, and definitely keeping in mind that yes, you are focusing on this language, but you always have to prioritize your own personal health, both physical and mental health. And that's going to give you the energy to continue to go intensively. And I would absolutely tell you that my biggest burnouts have been because the only priority in my life was learning the language. And that is a mistake. You can absolutely put 8 hours of a day into learning a language, but that does not mean that you should deprioritize other aspects of staying healthy and sharp.
All right, we have a couple more questions from Hey Jean, who submitted them in advance. She wants to know what some fun and effective ways you study grammar are.
Okay, I'll take this real quick. I find that if I'm just taking a grammar book and studying it from start to finish, obviously I've said this many times, doing it at the start of a language project is crazy. I would always try to do it a little bit into the project, because if you're doing it at the start, you don't have enough context. But let's say that you, like Hygiene, she has like a good level of French, she's able to communicate, and she wants to polish up the grammar. I would again try to have conversations with your tutor to see where your greatest weaknesses are. because anything that feels more relevant is going to be more interesting. And if you are not necessarily struggling with the subjunctive, and you decide just because you don't know it yet, you're going to put effort into that, it may not be as interesting as if you are mixing up the simple past and the imperfect past, and that actually influences your conversation so much more. Then you might actually find it more interesting to focus in on that until you have it good. So I would recommend things that are affecting your immediate ability to communicate, because that tends to be just more interesting than the general stuff that you'll get to eventually. What would you add to that, Lindsay?
I really love, I think you still do this, right? The sentence activity, the challenge in Ad1. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I really love that for grammar. Like just thinking, okay, I've been learning this tense or this verb or whatever, and then seeing, okay, what can I actually do with this? Because I think a lot of the times grammar feels very detached from the rest of language learning, so it becomes very hard to then actually use it. So maybe you feel like, oh, well, I know the grammar, but I'm not producing it when I want to. And so actually using it in context is really helpful. And another thing you said about the stuff that's relevant, I like actually when I get to a certain level, almost going back to the beginning and like looking at, okay, right, here we go, page 1. Oh, gender. Oh yeah, this is really easy. And the stuff that you can then just skip past, you don't have to like do all of the exercises, but like going back to the beginning and just going, right, yeah, I know that. Oh yeah, I'd forgotten that. Or, oh, that's why everyone says that. Like just this morning, I did a bit of Chinese, and for the first time, like I discovered the whole thing like with ni hao, where you go second tone and then third tone when there's 2 third tones together. No one had ever told me that before. Like it's such a simple thing. It's hello, like the first word, you know? So just little things like that you pick up that maybe you missed the first time around. I find that quite helpful as well with grammar, because it's quite fun then, because it feels really rewarding, because it's stuff, a lot of it is stuff you know, and you're like, do know it. Oh, okay.
I think it's fun also in the sense that as you go back through all of that stuff, you really get to realize how much you do know. And so it's kind of like, got that. And so that's enjoyable too. So Benny, I saw you unmuted your microphone.
Yeah, before we take any final question, I did notice that Deborah had added when she was, we were discussing the accent, that she's worried about people not understanding her, which is obviously a bigger issue than just, I want to be a spy in the country or something. So I would recommend again that to be more specific about how to tackle that issue is if you're talking to a teacher directly and the teacher is helping you generically, you can also be as active as possible with your private tutors. Tell them to help you with your accent issues. So for instance, in Italian, there's what I would find would be the strongest indicator of an Italian accent would be that it's unlikely to end it's unlikely to end a word with a consonant. So because of that, Italians tend to add an extra vowel at the end. And if I am used to an Italian accent, I can extrapolate what word they mean when they say a word and they add that extra vowel. But if somebody's not used to that, they might be imagining a word that's spelled differently. So if you are talking with your teacher and you point that example out in particular, and you think of others with Italian that you know tend to cause communication issues, because it's all well and good to say in general my accent might make it hard for people to understand me, but there are very specific reasons that you can discuss with the teacher that are specific to you, that might be general for Italian speakers who are learning other languages. And if you can find those reasons, then you can try to fix them. And sometimes it just takes a lot of repetition. So if you tend to add the extra sound to a word, then you just need to, like, after a lesson, repeat a word over and over again, trying to like weasel that sound out. And it does take practice. It does take a lot of repetition, because this is just something that you've kept up for a very long time from your native language, but it can absolutely be unlearned. And then the final tip I would give for that is if you take audio of somebody speaking a few phrases. Whenever I've really worked on my language skills, I've taken just like 10 seconds of audio, and I've tried to get that perfect, like just that audio, not to have a perfect accent in general, but just those 10 seconds. And I've re-recorded it myself, and I'll send it to a teacher. And if you use a tool like SoundCloud, they actually let you comment on particular moments. So something that my friend Idausa talks about a lot with his mimic method stuff is kind of, you get feedback on these individual sounds, and then your teacher would say to that moment, you're adding this extra syllable, and that's making it harder to understand. And that way you're aware of why people may not understand you, because there is a reason behind every challenge in communication, and you just have to delve into it to find that reason.
All right, before we wrap things up and announce the winners, we have time for one more question. Alex, you said you have a question?
Yes, so you've mentioned teachers. So I would actually ask, what do you expect from your teachers or italki tutors?
You want to go ahead, Lindsay?
Yeah, okay. For me, it depends. If you're talking about italki, it depends what I'm looking for with the language. So it might be if I'm learning a language where, let's say I was to learn, I don't know, Afrikaans, right? So I've studied German in the past, I've studied a bit of Dutch, so Afrikaans, it kind of like fits in there. So I know the bits, I just need someone to help piece things together. So I'd be looking for a community tutor that I can be chatting with and then asking the odd question to now and then. But if I wanted to start learning something completely different, Tibetan, for example, I'm looking for a professional tutor who is going to be holding my hand and guiding me through the whole process. So it really depends on your own experience with that language and with languages that are perhaps similar. Not necessarily in terms of language families, but also in terms of like, is there a different script? Like as a whole thing, it could be that you've learned Arabic and now you're learning Russian. Nothing really in common, but the fact that there's a different script, so you have that thing to draw experience from. Also, I find that the more experienced you get as a language learner, the more you can work with teachers that are less experienced, and it kind of almost has this like sliding scale, if that makes sense, of like opposites. Yeah, I like tutors though overall, as a general rule, tutors that are gonna challenge me in some way. And I like it when people set me little homework tasks, nothing too complicated, but just the idea of like, okay, write a few sentences that we can look at the next session, because that then motivates me to do something in between connected to the lesson, rather than just doing something like on my own and keeping studying on my own that's unrelated. You know, I've then got a bit of a connection to the lesson, so it feels like more of a useful thing rather than just I'm there for the hour and it's done until next time. So that's something that I do like across the board.
Yep, and I'm the same. Whenever I'm picking a teacher, there's definitely that balance of like, now that I've been experienced enough in learning languages, I can find ways to get better benefits out of somebody who's not very experienced. I can have lots of ranges of conversations when I'm confident enough in the language to do that. But if I'm a beginner, then one thing that I actually do whenever I start a language learning project is I tend to actually book with a handful of teachers. So rather than testing one teacher out and then if things don't go well a few weeks later start things over with somebody else, my first week I would actually have 4 or 5 different teachers all booked. And it doesn't mean I'm going to have 4 or 5 teachers for the whole project, because I'm a little bit of a pessimist sometimes. I'm expecting several of the teachers to just not be a good fit for me. They may be excellent teachers for other people, but for me personally, I don't like teachers sticking to a very specific class layout that they want to do with all their students. That definitely works for a lot of people. They need that level of guidance, but I really want our lessons to be tailored around my particular issues that I'm having. And then if I tend to be having an issue with prepositions and they have a prepared lesson, great, that's fine. But sometimes teachers will just want to do their class schedule, and then I'll know and I'll just not book that teacher again. You know, I feel no guilt about it whatsoever, because you're paying for a service. So if you know, the teacher didn't do a bad job, but they're just not a good fit for me, So that's what I would recommend, is try to test out different teachers, because personality matches are quite important in this, and I find I need to have good chemistry with my teacher to be able to have the level of conversations, the level of learning. Because some teachers, like I have a speak from day one philosophy, and some teachers don't really get that, and they may actively try to explain things to me in English, which I know they're trying to help me, they're trying to make sure I understand, but that's actually going counter to what I'm aiming to do, of just communicating, even if I'm not fully understanding. And if a teacher doesn't get that, then I just can't continue lessons with them. So that's what I would recommend.
I do something similar to Benny. I book several tutors, and then I kind of narrow it down to the one that works best for me. And the one thing that's really important for me is that the tutor offers me something that I can't do on my own. So kind of similar to what Benny said, they have like a set structure that they work through. If they just want to work through a course book or something like that in the lessons, that's something that I can do on my own. I can study through a course book in my own time, at my own pace. I don't need to work with a tutor on that. So instead, I prefer that I do something with them that I'm not going to be getting from an alternate resource or an alternate method. And a lot of that is feedback. And then for me personally, I like to have a tutor who just like types everything into the chat so that I can continue to work on that material between lessons to continue improving in the way that I need to. So that's that for me. But I think if you ask anyone, everyone's going to say something a little bit different, because that's the thing about tutors and stuff like this, is it's very personalized and it's very up to you, like what you need at that time, at that stage, in that moment, and for you. And I agree with Benny that chemistry really matters a lot. Like I would almost say that I feel quite friendly if I'm not friends with most of my language tutors. So having someone that you connect with and that you get along with, and that their teaching style aligns with what you need, is really important.
Yeah, and then just a final addition to that, I'd say that when people are trying to pick tutors, a lot of people tend to overthink it, and they want to get like personal recommendations for teachers. And people ask me all the time, which teacher do you recommend I get on italki? Like there's only one teacher I'm going to recommend to everybody, as if that would work out. And ultimately, any teacher I have had good success with, I know for a fact that they would be a very bad match for a lot of people. And that's exactly why it's better to test it out and see who works for you, and to not overthink it. You don't need to get whoever's at the very, very, very top of the results, who's got like 10,000 5-star reviews. You just have to like pick somebody who's available, who looks like they'd be good, and see how it goes. And if you overthink it, then this is effectively postponing your opportunity to actually speak. And it's better to get a teacher who's quite good than to spend months and months and months researching until you get the world's best teacher. It really is better to just get started now.
All right, before we announce the winners, Benny, Lindsay, do you have any final words of encouragement for our participants?
Lindsay?
Just to keep going. I know when we started the call, Debbie said I was and I still am learning German, and that's amazing. Like, keep going. You all made amazing progress with the videos that we watched. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, and I really do want to emphasize that even as like Lindsay and I, we upload videos of ourselves in other languages all the time. It can feel like, you know, when you've got enough content on YouTube, that there's some extra level of experience or qualifications or something. But I am genuinely amazed at the videos that you guys have uploaded during this project. And it reminds me myself how hard I need to work to keep up with you guys, because sometimes I would slip behind in my own projects. So always remember that even when it's very easy to look at your own project and see all the things that went wrong. I know after every 3-month project I've ever had, there was always regrets and me thinking, I wish I could have gone further. I wish I would have learned that. I wish I didn't take that week to have like a lull, and I wish I kept my momentum up. There's lots of regrets I have. And we're all very self-deprecating in that way, but it's very important to know that I am looking at your videos and I'm very impressed. And that is it, and I'm sure Lindsay is as well. And it's very important to know that you are a polyglot, you're a part of the language learning community. This is a thing that is amazing to do, and you should be really proud of that.
And for me, of course, it's been an absolute honor getting to be in the challenge alongside you and see all of your progress. And as Benny said, it's just really impressive and inspiring to see your videos and your progress over the 90 days. So for the challenge, our winner is going to receive $250 in italki credits, as well as admission to their next Fluent in 3 Months challenge. And our advanced winner is going to get 6 months of link, as well as admission to their next challenge. So without any further ado, our winner of the challenge is Turia. Turia, you are our challenge winner. Would you like to say anything before I announce our advanced winner?
Yes, I can unmute. I am shocked and very grateful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, and our winner for advance is Nick. Nick couldn't join us today, but Nick was learning Ukrainian in the advanced challenge with us, so we will send him a message to let him know. So thank you so much to all of our finalists who joined us today and for all of the participants in the challenge. Thank you so much, Benny and Lindsay, for joining us and answering the questions. And can you both let us know really quick where everyone can find you? Lindsay, where can people find you if they...
Yeah, best place is lindsaydoeslanguages.com. That went well.
And Benny?
As always, you can find me on Fluent in 3 Months and Irish Polyglot on the other social medias. And I think we can just make a quick mention of the Fluent in 3 Months challenge again. I think you touched on one of the differences, and another is that we wanted to make sure what made the challenge strong, the Ad1 challenge, was the community. That is the core of everything, and that is what everything revolves around, and we've simply added to that. We've seen what people were still struggling with, and we've come up with ways to make that a little bit easier in terms of extra things like the journal. I've created a video series to guide people in extra ways throughout their project, beyond what the community does that we know really makes a difference. And if you're interested in that, you can go to, what's the URL we're using at the moment, Shannon?
If you go to fluentin3months.com, you'll see a button at the top that says the course, and you can click that to find out more about the challenge and even sign up and save your place in an upcoming challenge.
Yep, there you go. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we will see you again soon. I'll be doing a couple of live videos next week over on my Benny Lewis channel, and I think 1 or 2 also on the Language Hacking Instagram channel. So I'll do a bunch of live streams next week, but otherwise, thank you again, Lindsay, for taking the time to help us with this. And definitely check her stuff out. Lindsay's got a lot of really, really cool content, and she's way better at Instagram than I am as well. So thank you, everybody else. Congratulations on your great work through the final Ad1 challenge, and we'll move on swiftly to the Fluent in 3 Months challenges.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.